Welcome to today's programme. My guest is broadcaster, presenter Simon Thomas. Simon, welcome to Facing the Canon.
Great to see you. How are you?
I'm good and I'm thrilled you're here.
Lovely to be here.
Great to be able to have this opportunity and conversation to tell a little of your own story. I know that you were brought up in a Christian home, but there was quite an experience, I gather, when you were 7 regarding a tree. Tell us that story.
Yeah, so my dad was a vicar, and so you're right, we were brought up in a Christian household. God was part of family life, but I always respected the fact Mum and Dad never imposed it on us. And we were living in rural Norfolk, so my dad's first parish was in this little village called Grimston, just outside Kings Lynn, West Norfolk. And it was one of those Saturday mornings in springtime where it just lashed it down with rain all morning. So me and my 2 sisters, Becky and Hannah, I was 7 at the time, Becky was 6, Hannah was still in nappies. And there wasn't much to do in the mornings. We got frustrated. Dad had meetings. Vicars always have meetings, and lots of them.
Always meetings. And sometimes, Simon, meetings about meetings.
Yeah, I think it may be one of those kind of mornings. And we were just frustrated. So he, in the afternoon, because the weather cleared, said, let's go out for a walk. So we drove to this forest called Massingham Woods, near where we lived. And it was just one of these pine forests. Now, I found this as a 7-year-old intensely boring because I was at the age where any tree needed to be climbed, but pine trees can't really climb. And there was this one tree that stood out from all the others, which was had 2 branches. It wasn't a pine tree, 2 big, huge sort of branches. And I climbed up it and I sat in the middle, so my sort of legs were hanging over in the middle. And I remember my dad being stood there, he was with Becky and my mum was there, and it just started to rain again. And Mum said, let's move over to the other side of the clearing. And we were like, that's ridiculous. Why? We're already sheltered from the rain where we are. And Dad said, Mum, Jill, don't be ridiculous. My mum's name was Jill. And she said it again a couple of minutes later. I think we should move to the other side of the clearing to get into the shelter. Again, we were like, oh, Mum, why do we have to do that? Dad, Jill, come on, don't be so silly. And I can still see her face to this day, and it's many, many years later. She looked at me and she looked at Dad and said, I think we need to move now. And I think Dad, just for a bit of peace and quiet, just said, look, son, come on, get yourself down, let's move over to the other side. And so across the clearing we went, and I can still hear it now, I can still see it now, and I can still smell it now. Moments later, after getting to the other side of the clearing, it was just the sound like a tornado jet was coming very low over the forest. And then I just remember looking up and just seeing this kind of channel of fire above my head, and then this huge explosion, and then this massive thud, and there was smoke everywhere. Clearly we were shocked, stunned, whatever words you want to use. And eventually, as the smoke cleared, there was the tree that I'd been sat in, split in 2. I still have a photo of it at home. And it was deeply traumatic. I remember running back to the car in tears. And a few hours later, some friends of ours from my dad's church called the Bowers family, who are just a lovely Christian family, came round just to kind of be with us. And we went back later that evening, and that's where the photo came from, to look at what had happened. And Rosemary turned to my mum and said, what was it that made you move? Because nothing in Mum's story made any sense in terms of why we moved, and yet it ultimately saved my life that we did move. And she just said, I heard this voice, and I felt it was the voice of God just saying, you need to move. And that was just, for me, it's something I've always held on to. When you have those moments in life where you doubt, is this God I follow? Is this story of Jesus, is it real? I think back to that moment. Actually, years later, Gerald Coates, you'll know well, no longer
friend.
with us.
Yes.
I remember doing an event when I was on Blue Peter for him, and he came up to me afterwards, didn't know this story at all, and he was just chatting to me. He said, Simon, just while you were talking tonight, I just felt God saying to me that when you were around about the age of 7, something happened to you that made you realise this God was real. And I said, yeah, I was nearly killed by lightning, and told him the story, and he was like, there you go.
Amazing. What a story.
I know.
But your mum, we all get promptings.
Yeah, that was some prompting.
But your mum followed the prompting.
Yeah.
And obviously had the discernment to say, listen, we need to do something. But God obviously, Simon, preserved your life.
Yeah, in a quite major way.
Which is hugely exciting.
I know.
Because it's like God saying, no, I have a purpose for you.
Yeah,
And
a plan. I don't.
And I
yeah.
have a plan for
and at
you.
the age of 7, you don't know what that is.
But it drew you to God.
Yeah.
Okay, you go to university. You went. Was it Birmingham?
I was Birmingham. Yeah,
And
studying
you- history.
I've done nothing with it. I loved it. I've done nothing with it.
But while you were there,
Yeah.
go on, tell us about Lunchbox.
Oh my days, you've done your research. This is impressive. Yeah, that's really where I caught the TV bug from. So I was in that period at university where I was thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. For a moment, I flirted with the idea of joining the police. Actually went down for a selection day at Hendon.
Yes.
Failed the medical. Well, that's another story, but I'm glad I did. But we had this TV station at the Guild of Students of Birmingham University called Guild TV. And at the start of university, you have this huge kind of societies fair where all the different societies at university gather in the end of Freshers Week and sell their wares and try and encourage you to join up. I saw this thing called Guild TV and I had a bit of an interest in broadcasting and I thought, I'm going to see what this is about. And so I ended up doing some stuff voluntarily for them. And then they said, we've got this program called The Lunchbox, goes out Friday lunchtime. The presenter we've had for the last couple of years has decided to focus on their finals, so is stepping down. Do you fancy presenting it? Now, you've got a great setup here. It was a little bit like that at Birmingham, not quite as fancy, but there was a place called Pebble Mill, which is where BBC's daytime output in Birmingham used to come from. And this great guy called Lizo had got all this second-hand equipment, so they'd set up a proper studio, 3 cameras, a proper gallery, talk back, so the old earpiece in the ear.
Yes.
So I learned over time, listen, it was a terrible program. Nobody really watched it. It was on in the kind of bars in the Students' Union, on mute, on the little tellies, no widescreen tellies back in the early 90s. And I got a real bug for it. But it wasn't really until back in my parents' hometown of Beccles, where my dad's last gig as a vicar was, that God really spoke to me about whether this was just a bit of a pipe dream or whether this was actually the direction he wanted me to go in.
Absolutely. But then you did pursue that. You moved to London. You were selling suits at Selfridges.
2.5 years. I started off selling suitcases in the basement of Selfridges because I came down to London at that point before things got much more regional in terms of broadcast media in this country. Everything's pretty much in London. I knew that's where I needed to be, but I didn't have the money, didn't have the parental support financially to survive in terms of chasing this dream in London, but I needed to be there. So I needed a day job and I went to Selfridges, got a job for a few months in the luggage department, which is bizarre. And then
got promoted to suits.
well, yeah, it did feel like a promotion to the design. It's called the men's designer room on the second floor. It's very fancy. I remember David Beckham came in just before he got famous. He used to come in every Tuesday. He'd always come in and ask where the Versace was, and would grab a load, and off he went again. So I was there, but all the time I was running at weekends for Children's BBC on Wood Lane. I did a couple of evenings a week for LBC Radio in London, who were then in Hammersmith, not in Leicester Square. So I'm trying to get my foot in the door.
Yes.
That's the hardest thing, is getting your foot in the door and meeting the right people. And along the way, I tried applying for Blue Peter twice. Got nothing more than the letter back that said, thanks, we'll keep your details on file. That's basically code for no.
Yes.
But they don't actually say no. And then at the tail end of 1998, everything changed.
Yes, it opened up for you. Now, for those from our global audience who've not heard of Blue Peter, what is Blue Peter?
Right, well, the first thing to say, it is the longest running children's show in the entire world.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's been going over 60 years.
Yes.
It just celebrated its 40th anniversary when I joined, so that ages me slightly. But it's essentially a 25-minute magazine show. Now, it has changed now because the whole broadcast landscape has changed now, particularly for kids. They watch lots of YouTube. My son Ethan,
Yes.
it's YouTube. It's not CBBC like it was back in the day. 25-minute magazine show. And it's called Blue Peter because there was these voyages of discovery that went out from this country, these big ships, many, many hundreds of years ago. And the flag that was raised on these ships of discovery was called the Blue Peter. And that's where the show got its name from. It was a show of discovery, both in terms of travel, in terms of, educating and showing people what adventure looked like. So as presenters, you'd get to try lots of daredevil thing. I did 25 countries during the course of 6 years. So essentially, it's a magazine show, but all the time, it's about discovering new things. So that's where the name came from. And it's been going a long time. I grew up watching it and then ended up working on it.
Yes. Now, and during that time, lots of adventure. You went skydiving.
I did.
I mean, what was the hardest thing that you were asked to do?
Well, that was the one I thought was going to be the most fun, but in the end, psychologically, mentally became the hardest. So the idea was I'd train, learn to skydive, get my license, and then we were billed to do a display at an air show somewhere in the UK over the course of the next summer. So out we went in the January, and I got to jump number 4. So at this stage, you are once you pull your chute, you're on your own, but you come out the plane at, I think we were jumping around about 13,500 feet. You get about 55 seconds of free fall, 120 miles per hour. Then you pull your chute at 5,500 feet. So I had 2 instructors from the RAF, Toby and Roger. They hold your arms on the way down. So we did 3 jumps. They went well. It was very nerve-wracking. Jumping out of a perfectly healthy aircraft is madness, but it's fun. And then came the 4th jump. And all I can say is we were coming down at 120 miles per hour. I could just feel, as I went to pull my chute, nothing happening. Then I can feel this sensation like someone's punching my back. And it felt a lot longer than it was, but eventually the chute flung out, appears above me, and everything's fine, and gently down I came. And what they do is, after every jump, they show you the video of what happened, because they want to show you your body position. It's so important with skydiving. Your body position is good because your legs position affects how you fly through the air. They showed me that jump, and I watched with horror, because as they showed me, you can see the reason why I felt those punches is as I went to pull my chute, nothing happened. It didn't come out. And you've got Toby and Roger, literally as we're dropping through the air at 120 miles per hour, thumping the backpack to get the parachute out. And I totally lost my bottle. I did 2 more jumps and I couldn't do it anymore. So I went home feeling a failure. We were kind of seen by kids as these kind of superheroes, and I failed. But then an interesting thing happened is a year later, I persuaded the program, what about we make a program about going back and facing your fear?
Oh, very good.
So they eventually agreed to it because it's expensive to go back out there. And I said, look, I'm going to do it. And I got there and I remember arriving back at the same hotel. You know, sights and smells and sounds,
yes.
They fire off things.
They all came back.
Everything
Memories.
came back. And that night, I'm in my hotel room. Everything from the year before has come back. And I just had this wrestle in my mind, which is essentially tomorrow I'm putting my trust in a load of nylon string, 2 lots of it because you have a reserve chute, and some fabric. If those don't work, which is highly, highly, highly unlikely, I'm going to find out whether this God I believe in is true or not. And I didn't feel ready to find out. And it played with my mind the whole night. Now, there's a guy who you know called Phil Wall.
Yes.
Who's been like a mentor to me over the years. And he'd said to me ahead of the trip, says, I'm quite nervous, but I want to do it. He said, if you ever need to chat, to pray it through, give me a shout. So I woke up that next morning, I sit down at breakfast. My director was looking at me saying, you look white as a sheet, just didn't sleep well, so jet lagged, pull the other one. And I went to get some donuts from the opposite at Dunkin' Donuts just to give to the RF boys on the half an hour journey to the drop zone where you jump. And I felt sick. And I'd spoken to Phil literally 5 minutes before, and he prayed this really powerful prayer. He said, look, mate, you'll be okay. But he said, I'm just going to pray. And he said, Jesus, I pray right now in the next few minutes, because I told him about this wrestle in my head the night before, that Simon would know that this God that he follows, that you, Jesus, are real. Amen. Thanks, Phil. Dunkin' Donuts, get the donuts, waiting to cross the road to get back to the hotel to get in the van. And I felt this tap on my right shoulder. I looked round, there's this young guy, I've never met him in my life. I'm not going to do the American accent at this point.
Yes.
He just looked at me and he said, I want you to know Jesus is real. Bless you. And off he went. Now, I literally stood there shocked like this. And then I looked to my right and it's a long avenue. The guy's disappeared. I cannot see him anywhere. It's literally like a second between looking there, him saying that, me looking down, looking back, and he's vanished. And that was like one of those moments when I was 7, that reminder that this God, it's not some fantasy.
Do you think he was an angel?
Real. Yeah, I do actually. I 100% believe he was an angel.
I do.
Yeah. God's on my case. And I thought, I can do this. Yeah, I was nervous that first jump.
And
but we produced this epic film. And by the end of it, I'm doing somersaults out the side of a plane. It was just magnificent. And a real story of kind of conquering fear, which actually for the kids watching was a really good tale.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you moved on from Blue Peter, you went into football, presenting and commentating, and you've been doing that for a while now.
My aim was to get into sports broadcasting, tried the BBC, didn't happen, and then Sky in 2005 said, we'll take you on. So I did a few years on a channel called Sky Sports News. Then I got the gig of doing the Football League on Sky, and then by the 2015-16 season, I got the big gig, which was the Premier League. That was kind of the top at Sky in terms of sports presenting. So it was a long journey, but I've always loved sports. So to be doing that for your job
was amazing, isn't it?
Unbelievable.
Amazing. Now, you got married to Gemma.
Yeah.
And then there was something that you never ever dreamt you'd have to face when your wife passed away, and incredibly quickly and suddenly.
Yeah.
Tell us a little about that.
Yes, I've been married to Gemma since 2005, and then the autumn of 2017, as you said, everything suddenly went horribly, horribly wrong. So in 2009, we'd had Ethan. So he was 8 at the time. I was actually going through, during this period, some really horrendous mental health problems. I suddenly was getting massive anxiety and panic attacks and depression around work. So I'd actually come off Sky in the autumn of 2017, which was impossibly hard because I got my dream job, and suddenly mentally I couldn't do it anymore. I was looking back at it now, I was having a breakdown.
Yes.
In amongst that, Gemma starts to feel unwell. Now, she was 40 at the time, so she was young. Just plenty of headaches. Looking back on it, there were bruises that wouldn't go. And then this fatigue began to build during the middle part of that November of 2017. And in the end, after trips to the doctors who didn't pick up on it, and that's one of the biggest things with blood cancer that as president of Blood Cancer UK we're trying to change, which is awareness. We eventually took her to A&E because the doctors weren't picking up on what it was, because we were just worried about her. And it was a Monday night in Reading, and in the early hours of that Tuesday morning, she was diagnosed with a blood cancer of some sort. We didn't know what at the time. And then it was just like a cartwheel of events that you felt simply unable to exert any kind of control on. You feel as the husband, you feel as the person standing on looking, and for anyone who's been alongside ill loved ones, it's a horrible experience, not just the fact they're ill, but the fact that you are helpless to do anything about it. She was transferred on the Tuesday to Specialist Hospital in Oxford, where she was diagnosed with an aggressive form of blood cancer called acute myeloid leukemia on a Tuesday. And the first couple of days she responded to the treatment, and we knew it was a long road back. She was given a 50-50 chance of survival. So that was devastating itself, but you know, in terms of hope, you hang on to the 50% that do get better. And then on the Friday, just everything cartwheeled, totally out of control. She went from looking actually in the best health she had done for quite some time on the Thursday night to falling unconscious in the early hours of Friday morning. And by 8:30 on a Friday morning in November, you are being sat down in a room with a doctor on your own, because Ethan's back at home with family, being told quite out of the blue that Gemma's got hours to live. And then you're gathering family and friends, you're wondering how you go about telling Ethan, and by early evening at the age of 40 she's gone. So you've gone literally from 3 days of diagnosis to death. And I prayed with the most faith I've ever prayed that day that God would put her through. My constant plea to God was, please, please, Lord. It was less about me. Do not leave my boy without a mum.
Yeah.
Please don't. And ultimately those prayers weren't answered. And from that point on, for quite some time, it was hell. It was a battle on lots of different fronts.
It was dark. And
really
felt
dark.
Desolate.
Yeah.
Did you feel kind of abandoned by God, or did you, in the midst of that storm, was the peace of God there?
On the day of her funeral, we had a big service at our church where we were in Reading at the time, Greyfriars, and there was 400, 500 there. It was huge, but you're just in a bit of a daze. Did the eulogy, you get through it. And then we had the wake afterwards. I hate that name, by the way. And then we had the last lot at the crematorium. And I think the gravity of the day and of the 3 weeks before hit me that afternoon in the darkness of that December day at the crematorium. So often just hopeless places. It feels like there's not a lot of hope in a crematorium. And as we waited and the hearse appeared, I remember just collapsing to the ground and just shouting out no, and my friends kind of picked me up from the gravel. And I got a friend of mine who, quite a few watching this will have heard of, Carl Beach, who has been instrumental with Christian Vision for Men for so many years, and such a good mate of mine, and he was there. And I remember at the back, he just prayed out loud. He just said, God, I just pray right now that this man, that this family would just know your peace, that your peace would descend on this place. And so we went in, it was a very short sort of 20-minute thing. And I felt this remarkable peace. I mean, remarkable, in a place I really should not be feeling peace.
Yes.
For the first time, I felt not content of what had happened, but okay to sit with the pain of what had happened, but also be thankful for the life that she had and the person that she was. I remember getting back to our house about an hour later, and a friend of mine, his wife, who wouldn't profess to have any faith, had lost her brother to suicide only a year or two before. And she turned me just before they left to go home that night, and she said, do you know what? She said, I don't really understand this, but as I stood in that really grim place just a couple of hours ago, and as we sung that final song, she said, I felt this peace that I have never, ever felt before. And I don't know what it was. And I remember saying to her, it's God.
Yeah, it is God.
It's that peace of God that surpasses all understanding, breaking in to chaotic, pain-filled places. It's basically God's peace reigning in places you'd least expect it to reign and to be. It's an amazing thing, but after that, though, it was tough, really tough.
One of my favourite scriptures is from Song of Songs, where it says in chapter 2, winter is over, springtime has come, and the sound of doves can be heard. And bereavement, there's a winter, but where people have hope. So obviously you got through that. Your book, Love Interrupted, hugely illuminating and very heartwarming. Did you find it, cathartic or therapeutic, trying to articulate what happened?
Yeah, I think I did. I mean, it was hard at times writing it, but I think what I wanted to do is, I think there's a temptation, both as non-Christians and Christians, we like to sanitize death a little bit, because it's the great taboo. We don't want to talk about it. We know it's going to happen, but it'll happen on another day. We don't like to think about it too much, but sometimes we're going to have to deal with it. And all of us at some stage will have to deal with it. And I didn't want to sanitize it. I wanted to be really honest, particularly from a Christian point of view, because I did find it difficult in the early days where some Christians would offer you those what felt like platitudes. Well, she's in a better place now, and she's with Jesus, and she's not suffering anymore. But the raging thing in my mind was, but she should be here.
Yeah.
She should be still Ethan's mum. She shouldn't be in heaven. It wasn't time for a trip to heaven. So I wanted to be really honest, because do you know what? The biggest lesson I've learned, well, I've learned lots, but one of the lessons I learned quite early on, which has been a big thing for me, and actually for Ethan, as we've sort of navigated the last few years, and this is true for us as Christians, it is absolutely okay to experience joy and pain at the same time. Now, I think back to where I first really recognised this. England had asked if Ethan would be a mascot at their home game against Italy in the March of 2018. Amazing thing for him to do. So we went to Wembley together. I've still got the pictures at home of him walking out of the tunnel with Eric Dyer, who was the England captain for the night. He didn't captain England too many times after that.
Yes.
But he was captain. He brings Ethan out first. Just seeing Ethan's look of awe and wonder at Wembley, 90,000 people, the national anthem ringing out. As I took him home later that night, he was still in his fresh England kit. He was tired. It was gone 10. He's only 8. And I just said to him before he fell asleep, I said, how was that? He said, oh, Daddy. He said, it was the best night ever. I'm so proud. I said, I'm proud of you. He said, but I'm sad as well. And I said, why are you sad? Obviously, I knew the answer. I'm sad because Mummy wasn't here to see it. I just went, that's it. This is his life going forward, and actually, to an extent, mine.
Yes.
In that he experienced great joy tonight and pride of being an England mascot, but sitting alongside that is pain.
Bittersweet.
And when those milestones in his life comes, like the day he leaves school, like the day hopefully he gets good exam results, the day maybe one day he gets married, whatever it might be, joy and pain can coexist. And it is absolutely fine for us as Christians to feel both those things at the same time, because it doesn't lessen our faith in God. It doesn't lessen who God is. God understands more than anybody what pain is like.
Absolutely. And Simon, there are some plants that produce a beautiful fragrance, but they only produce a beautiful fragrance when they're crushed. And you probably are not aware of it, but there's a great fragrance that permeates from you.
It's not my aftershave.
No, it's not your aftershave. But you got remarried.
I know.
So, was that a surprise?
I'll be honest, I didn't expect to ever find love again. I didn't think someone would be able to love me again, not because I'd become unlovable, but because of the baggage of history and all that had come before. And I remember in the kind of May of 2018, I think it was God just laying his hand on me. I just thought, why have I accepted that life going forward now is just going to be some kind of second best? Because God isn't the God of second bests.
No.
God is the God who brings newness out of wreckage. He's the God who repairs broken hearts. He's the God who revitalizes people when they feel utterly worn down. Why can't this be true for me? I know that life can never be the same again. Why can't it be as good again? And then I met this amazing girl called Dorina, who I don't really know how to describe her apart from she's just, I feel incredibly blessed to have met two incredible women.
Yeah.
And she's just a remarkable empathy when I first became a friend of hers, ability just to sit alongside quite a broken man. But as time went on and we fell in love, I realised I'd met a really remarkable woman, just a woman of, I mean, she's very beautiful.
Yes.
But she is utterly beautiful on the inside.
Yes.
Has an incredible generosity of spirit. She's someone who just has always been able to stand with her friends when her friends have gone through really difficult times. She was someone who became an amazing person in Ethan's life as well. And that's a really difficult thing to do. You know, when we talk about step parenting and blended families, you know, loving someone else's child like they are your
Yes.
own is an amazing
Yeah,
gift. But it's a
is.
tough gift you can give someone because it's asking you to do things that perhaps in life you didn't expect you were ever going to do. But it has been a remarkable blessing, and now we've got, she's not far from here, through in the other room, a beautiful 4-month-old daughter called Talit.
Absolutely beautiful.
You know, when I look back on 5 years ago and look at now, I would never have believed that life would have become what it has done now. But all the way through, what I see, John, right the way through, is the way that God was with me every step of the way. We have that impression that
Absolutely.
when the really tough stuff hits the fan in life, when we
course.
feel on the floor, that somehow God leaves the building. I felt at times he'd gone, but he hadn't. He was always there, walking sometimes quietly, but every step of the way he walked me through. And when I look back at the last 5 years and the different friendships that came out of it, and the story of Dorina and the story of her relationship with me, and then Ethan and now Talitha, I see God's blessing and God's providence and God's love and God's kindness woven throughout what starts as a really deeply tragic story.
Yes. Simon, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you sharing your story. I know it would have encouraged many of our listeners. Thank you for joining us on Facing the Canon.
Absolute pleasure. Bless you.
Highly recommend Simon's book, Love Interrupted, a fantastic read and quite a healing read actually for anyone who is suffering from grief, but anyone really, because we're all part of this world, and the story of life is about life and death, but it's also about redemption. I hope you've been inspired by Simon's story. Thank you so much for joining us on Facing the Canon. Please join us again.